Welcome back to Shadowy Stories. I never thought it would end this way. My truck windows shattered, the interior filled with snow, the frigid wind and snow blowing in on me, to empty eyes staring at me like a predator, assessing the helpless animal it was about to kill. Of course, it didn't start that way. When I picked up my delivery that morning, there was no snow falling, just the remnants of a blizzard from a few days prior which had dropped about 4 inches. Emergency management had done a decent job of clearing the roads, so my journey was mostly unaffected. But as I drove, I looked at the small snow banks by the side of the road, cursing them for not being bigger so I could have skipped this early run. I had to drive my truck through some pretty desolate stretches of country. You crave anything to break the monotony of endlessly repeating trees on either side of the road. When riding routes like that, it's not easy to stay awake on those kinds of roads. Sometimes I wonder, if I were a bird flying overhead, looking down, would I see some kind of monster hiding just behind the trees on either side? I know it's just my mind playing tricks, trying to scare me into staying alert so I don't wreck the truck. This delivery was a 2-day run. Being a long-haul trucker, I could stay wherever I wanted when fulfilling orders. Hotels are nice, but I prefer my truck. I have a bed behind the driver's seat. It's cozy, despite the somewhat limited space. Plenty of shelves above the bed, and a projector mounted to the wall for passing the time. I like to watch suspense movies. I also keep a few books on the shelves. Frankenstein, Heart of Darkness, that sort of thing. My laptop is always there, holding my half-written novel. The only things I need are food and a bathroom. I keep a stash of snacks around, but they can't beat a hot meal after a while. I have a few favorite truck stops along my routes. They have 2 things in common: good food and quiet parking spots. I hate it when my truck is crammed and next to other trucks, some of whom park like idiots, so close I can barely open my door. I like to park on the edges of the lot where it's quieter, and I don't feel hemmed in. There is one downside, of course. Parking on the edge means a longer walk to the truck stop building, sometimes a considerable one. But even that isn't all bad. The walk lets me stretch my legs, get the blood flowing, work some muscles I don't use while driving. The only downside is they aren't open when diffusers. Usually, I pull the truck into my spot around dusk, head inside for dinner at the lunch counter, go back and grab my supplies for the night, then make one last bathroom run before they close at midnight. That night I followed my usual routine, pulling in and walking to the store for dinner, then going back in around 11:30 p.m. for supplies and the bathroom, before settling into the truck for the night. Usually, I keep a close eye on the upcoming weather. For some reason, that night I didn't. I woke up at 800 am and looked outside to a world of white. It had snowed, and it had snowed hard, like Mother Nature was trying to make up for an entire winter's worth of snowfall. I put on my cold weather gear and went outside to see how bad it was, to see if my truck was going anywhere today. When I jumped down from the cab, my legs disappeared. There was at least 3 feet of snow on the ground, and it was still coming down hard. I was like a beach umbrella stuck in the sand. I walked around the truck, made sure everything was okay, then headed back to the cab, brushing as much snow off me as I could. I climbed back into the truck's bed, turned on the news, and heard the reports of a major blizzard hitting the area. They predicted at least another foot of snow. Great time to call and get yelled at by Eric. "Why aren't you there yet?" Eric roared. "There's this thing called snow," I said. "It falls on the ground and piles up, and then it makes it hard to drive." Fine. When will you be there?" "Well, considering I haven't seen a snowplow yet, and they'll definitely clear the highways before this parking lot. Plus I need new tires, which I've been telling you about for months and you ignored me." I said, "Really? I have no idea. When will you get the delivery to Benjamin?" He was silent for a good long while, then said, "Don't bother coming back after this run." Fine by me. I wasn't reliant on him for deliveries. I sat back, turned off the projector, and decided to try and get some more sleep. Well, like good old John, when I first started trucking, told me, "Get your rest when you can get it." Over the years, that advice served me well. A little extra sleep meant a little less coffee. I woke up a few hours later, peeked outside. It was still snowing. Even the tracks I had left earlier were gone. Nature called, so I begrudgingly put on all my cold weather gear, including gloves and goggles, and headed for the main building. It felt like overkill, getting dressed like a yeti just to use the bathroom, but that feeling soon dissipated. The snow was coming down so hard that I couldn't even see the main building. Using my truck as a reference, I drew a line with my hand and started walking in that direction. Trudging through the wind-driven snow started to become laborious. I felt like I should have reached the main building by now. I stopped and looked around, two things hitting me at the same time. First, I couldn't see the building. Second, I couldn't see my truck. To compound matters, my footprints were quickly disappearing. I tried to focus and headed out again, in what I hoped was the direction of the building. About 15 minutes later, and what I think was pure luck, I saw the outline of the store faintly appear on the right. My direction wasn't entirely correct, but close enough to find the place. My cold weather gear was starting to fail me, the frigid wind finding small gaps to penetrate the clothing. As I approached, I felt a sense of relief at the thought of getting inside where it was warm, not to mention the large cup of steaming coffee I was looking forward to. I reached out and pushed on the door, but it didn't budge, probably frozen shut. I pulled a few times with more force, but still no luck. I looked through the glass windows. It was pitch black inside, no lights, and no sign of any snow being shoveled from the walkway. Oh no, I thought, with this much snow, they can't even make it to work. The hopes of a warm bathroom and hot coffee dashed. I took one last despondent look at the dark store, then turned to walk back to my truck. Like I said, my footprints were covered, and now, effectively snowblind. I had no compass or any means of navigation. I tried to use the wall of the store as a reference, hoping it would guide me back to the truck. I could feel my cold, wet feet protesting, and I hugged my jacket tighter, trying to block the wind as the snow reached my knees, making walking like trying to navigate through quicksand. In hindsight, I should have waited in the truck for the snowplows. I have plenty of empty iced tea bottles for emergencies, but hindsight is 20/20. And I needed to get back to the truck and prevent this mistake from becoming a fatal one. If I got lost and didn't find the truck, no one would be looking for me. They'd probably find my frozen corpse in the spring. When the thought came, I was fumbling through the snow when I suddenly tripped over something. I tumbled into the snow and quickly scrambled to regain my footing, brushing the snow off my face. Thankful I had brought my goggles. I tried to reorient myself but wondered what I had tripped over. I dug around in the snow and found the object that caused my fall. It was one of those parking space dividers. I chuckled to myself, until the horrifying realization hit me that I should not be encountering one of those in the middle of the parking lot. In fact, on a direct path from the store to my truck, these dividers should be dozens of yards to the right. I cleared the remaining snow and found it was almost parallel to my path. I was severely off course. The good side was, now I had a point of reference and could hopefully correct my course. I looked around and found myself in a world of white. The store was gone, and the truck was nowhere in sight. I took a deep breath and used the divider as a reference. In that process, I remembered one key thing about these dividers. They lined the edge of the parking lot and there was a drop-off behind them. In retrospect, it was lucky I tripped over it rather than stepping over it and tumbling down the embankment. I might never have been able to climb back up. As I turned to head in what I hoped was the direction of the truck, I caught a glimpse of a shadow out of the corner of my eye. With the blowing snow, visibility was extremely limited. Anything a few yards away was barely visible. It was probably just my mind playing tricks. I had been out in the cold longer than I anticipated. Time to get back to the truck. Then I remembered why I left the truck in the first place. I felt the urge. I quickly looked around, saw nothing but snow, and began unzipping. Unzipping sounds easy, it wasn't. My zipper was frozen, and my bladder felt like it was flashing red alert, telling me it was going to relieve itself whether I was ready or not. I finally got it unzipped and started to urinate, when a sudden shift in wind direction sent my stream everywhere, soaking my pants. I quickly adjusted my position so I was facing down. When finished, I looked down at my now soaked pants and cursed under my breath. Yet another reason to find the truck quickly. While it sounds funny, wet pants would turn into icy pants and eventually become a hazard. I looked down at the divider, now adorned with yellow snowflakes, and started heading out on my new course. The snow wasn't letting up at all. Even though I'd only been standing there for about 10 minutes, my energy was beginning to wane. Trudging through waist deeps, no was more tiring than riding. The wind howled in my ears, stealing my hearing. There wasn't much to hear out here, but I thought I heard something. I looked around, only to see white. Is this where I start hallucinating? Like the imaginary monsters I see peeking at me from the trees when I drive. I looked back towards my imagined destination, wondering if hallucinations were the first step to freezing to death. As if to answer me, a strong gust of wind knocked me off my feet. It felt like a giant hand had pushed me in the back. I looked up only to see snowflakes swirling in the air, forming miniature tornadoes. I got up and continued toward the truck, each step feeling like my feet were encased in concrete. I slogged onward, trying to muster what little energy I had left to keep going. I couldn't die in a parking lot, mere yards from my warm truck. The irony would be immense. I continued walking, barely conscious, just wanting to get back to the warmth of my little home on wheels. I kept my head down, not even looking around anymore. It made no difference. I was starting to despair. This was like trying to find a needle in a haystack. I was never going to make it back. Then I bumped into something and stumbled back a few steps. The snow was so deep I lay there like a turtle unable to right itself. I looked up and the thing I bumped into was the rear foot of my truck. A little more to the right and I would have missed it entirely. I let out a sigh of relief, walked to the cab door, and reached into my pocket for the key. I fumbled around for a good long while before feeling a bump in a different pocket. I ripped my glove off, pulled out the key, used all the strength I had left to climb up into the cab, and collapsed in the driver's seat, a wave of warmth washing over me. I sat there for a long time just recovering until I finally mustered the courage to start taking off my cold weather gear. I turned the heater on, tossed the outer layers onto the passenger seat, and, wearing only my underwear, reclined the seat and basked in the warmth that flowed over me like ocean waves. I imagined myself sitting on the beach, the sun beating down on me, the ocean calling to me. I dozed off like that. I awoke with a sore back and stretched out in the seat as best I could. Then looked out the windshield. The snow seemed to have let up a bit, and the wind wasn't as fierce. Still no sign of a snowplow. I wasn't going anywhere until it came in the distance. I could just make out the outline of the store. I wasn't going back there until the parking lot was cleared, but looking around, I couldn't imagine how long that might take. There was at least 4 feet of snow on the ground, and it was still coming down. I climbed into the sleeper berth, pulled the covers over me snugly, and decided to get some real sleep. Several hours later, feeling somewhat human again, I rolled over and turned on the radio to try and get a sense of how bad things were. I couldn't even get the local stations, so I put on a movie. After the movie ended, I decided to check my supplies, as I might be here a while. I had plenty of snacks, chips, pretzels, jerky, etc. As long as I didn't gorge myself, I should be fine. The mini fridge had drinks, and water wasn't an issue. I just needed to grab some snow, melt it, and filter it. Just one last thing to check to make sure I could ride out this blizzard. I looked at the fuel gauge, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. I was down to a 1/4 tank. This might be enough. It might not. It depended on how long it took for the snowplows to get here. Once they freed me, I could make it the 100 yards or so to the gas station. As I looked at the fuel gauge, my eyes drifted to the windshield and the expanse of white before me. The snow had finally stopped, and I could clearly see the store. But I could also clearly see that it was still closed. It was hard to believe anyone would clear this much snow. I guess that's why they have drop-offs, owns along the edges of the parking lot. Then my eyes caught movement. There was an animal moving around the parking lot. At first, I thought it was a deer. I saw the wide antlers. But the more I looked, the more I felt something was off about this creature. It was much larger than any deer I'd ever seen. Its torso glided evenly above the snow. almost like a boat. Its face, it looked like it was decaying, bare bones showing, and its teeth were enormously long, extending far beyond its lower jaw. It was unsettling to look at. It was sniffing around in the snow. The more I thought about it, the more I figured it might be at the spot where I urinated earlier. I was both fascinated and terrified by this creature. It suddenly looked at me. I startled. I hadn't expected it to look directly at me. My blood ran cold, its gaze piercing my very soul, making me wish I'd never come to this place. When it took a step towards me, I quickly jumped back into the bed and pulled. I trembled with fear, my breathing ragged. What was that thing? How could such a creature exist? I tried to calm myself, to get my breathing back under control, but the image of the creature lingered in my mind. It's just my imagination, I told myself. It's just a deer wandering around outside. I kept telling myself that over and over again, until my brain almost believed it. I didn't pull the curtain open to confirm, though. I didn't want to risk another look at it. I grabbed a pack of cheese crackers and put on a die-hard movie, trying to forget the thing outside. About 15 minutes into the movie, I felt it jostle. I don't know how else to describe it. It felt like something had gently nudged my truck, almost like a strong gust of wind that moved the cab. The two sides of my mind battled fiercely. Should I investigate or ignore it? Fear won over curiosity, and I decided to ignore it. For the time being, it wasn't until the second jostle. Actually, it was more like the fifth or sixth, that curiosity won and prompted me to investigate. I peeked through the curtains, only to see nothing but snow out of the windshield. I climbed out and looked through the passenger side window, still blank as I looked through the driver's side window. I chided myself for being so neurotic. It must have been a deer, as I saw a pair of antlers. I rubbed my eyes, looked again, and it was gone. There were tracks in the snow that looked like deer prints, only much bigger. Or maybe my imagination was acting up again. I looked in the side view mirror and saw the creature poking at my tires with its foot. I was fairly certain its foot couldn't puncture the tire, but I wasn't going to take any chances. I reached for my tire iron and opened the door, intent on scaring it away, but it was gone again. I was starting to question my sanity. Was this thing real? Was my mind playing tricks on me? Or was this creature toying with me, trying to lure me out of the truck? I closed the door and went back to my movie, but I couldn't get the creature out of my mind. I sat on edge, waiting, listening, anticipating the next jostle. Before the movie ended, I drifted into an uneasy sleep. I was in a tall building full of bad guys. I had a machine gunning. I was stealthily approaching a guard. As I rounded a corner, there stood the land creature. It was enormous, its feet scraping the ceiling, and it looked at me with that decaying skeletal face and those empty eye sockets. It let out a sound that was half grunt, half growl, and began walking towards me. I backed away around the corner, trying to get back to my hiding place, but as I turned to run, it was suddenly in front of me. I raised the machine gun and began firing. I hit him in the chest, but he continued to advance. I backed away, firing bursts into his head. I saw bits of bone fly off, but he seemed unfazed and continued closing in. I fired at his legs, hoping to trip him up, but it seemed to have no effect. He seemed to have enough and lunged forward, pinning me against the wall with his foot. I looked down as blood began pooling around his foot on my stomach. He pulled back and lunged again, and again. Waves of pain shot through my body, crushing my spine. He retracted, and I slumped to the floor. As I tried to crawl away from the monster, blood pooled around me. I could only move using my arms. I could no longer feel anything below my waist. After crawling a few feet, I guess he got bored of torturing me. I could feel him tearing into my back. I could hear the sickening sounds of chewing and sucking as I was eaten alive. I woke up in a panic, cold sweat on my brow, looking around for the creature tearing into me. After a few seconds, I realized it was just a dream. I turned off the player and pulled back the curtain. I stuck my head out into the driver's seat to check my fuel situation. The needle had dropped significantly below a quarter tank, almost to an eighth of a tank. I peered out the windshield. The snow hadn't miraculously melted away. In fact, The wind had picked back up and was now blowing the snow around. What was once a uniform blanket of snow was now forming uneven hills and valleys like sand dunes in the desert. The store, no vehicles on the road. The sun hung low in the sky, and I still hadn't seen any other signs of life. I wondered if my fuel would last until the plow rescued me soon. I would have to seriously consider conserving it. The thought of sitting in the dark, wrapped in blankets, no heat, no movies wasn't appealing, but it beat freezing to death when the fuel ran out. I chided myself for not thinking of this plan earlier. If I had started conserving fuel when the sun was up and the temperature was higher, it would have been better. Now would pay for my lack of foresight. I grabbed every blanket I had from the cabinets, laid them on the bed and covered myself up, preparing for a long rest. I awoke to what felt like absolute darkness. I panicked for a moment till I remembered where I was. I looked at my watch, 400 am. I threw the covers off and was immediately assaulted by frigid air. I grabbed my flashlight and fumbled my way into the driver's seat. I turned the key, holding my breath as I waited for the engine to catch. My breath fogging up the interior of the cab as the engine roared to life. I felt even colder. I looked to my left and gasped. Shards of side window littered the seat and floor. As I slowly turned my head towards the passenger side window, fear crept up my entire being. A face was staring at me. But it wasn't a human face, it was the hideous visage of the land monster that had impaled me in my dream. As I stared at the empty black eyes of this hellish monstrosity, a liquid ran down my leg, forming a yellow puddle on the floor. He reared his head back, then slammed it into my passenger window. The window cracked. He reared his head back again, this time shattering the window completely, and snapped his long, pointed teeth trying to grab at me. I scrambled back, landing in the driver's seat amidst the broken glass. I knew I was dead. There was nothing I could do. I sat there as he entered the cab, lunging for me, his head halfway, and before getting stuck he jostled a bit, then roared in frustration. His feet were too wide, the window opening much smaller. He tried entering again and again, but his feet were too large. He couldn't fit. Just as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone. I looked around, trying to figure out where he went, but the night hit him like a veterinarian hides a needle. As I was looking, he silently reached in from behind me with a hoof. If it wasn't for his breath, he would have gotten me. I'd have to the other side. His jaws snapped shut as he continued his assault on this window, becoming more frantic as the frustration of not being able to grab me mounted. I stood between the two windows and decided to retreat to my sleeper berth and pull the curtain closed. I covered myself with blankets and, from a secret compartment under the bed, grabbed my .40 caliber automatic. I took the clip out, made sure it was full 10 rounds, slid it back in, and chambered around. This made me feel slightly better, but not much. I didn't know how real my dream was, and I wasn't sure if bullets could even hurt this monster. I was under no illusions anymore. This wasn't a deer. It was something far more dangerous, far more terrifying, and it was hunting me. I wrapped myself in the blankets again, holding the gun tight. The heater, with 2 broken windows, wasn't very effective. I'd deal with it in the morning. I wasn't doing anything in the dark with that thing lurking outside. I lay there, staring at the clock, ticking away the seconds, eyes wide open, ears straining for any sound, but there was nothing, only the wind whistling between the 2 broken windows, causing my curtains to flutter. Eventually, I realized it was futile to keep the truck running. The warm air was dissipating before even reached me, so I crawled out of the berth and slowly moved toward the driver's seat, gun in hand, my head swiveling from side to see if the monster was about to barge in through either window. I turned the key off, not even having a chance to pull it from the ignition, when a pair of antlers slammed against the window frame, vicious teeth mere inches from my face. I quickly spun and pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. He lunged at me again, and I panicked, until I realized the safety was still on. I flicked it off, took aim, but the monster was gone. I was afraid to move towards the windows, fearful it would lunge in again. I stood still as a statue, staring at the window it came through, then slowly turned to the other side. I kept glancing back and forth, trying to monitor both locations at the same time, I was shivering, not just from the cold, but from the fear of not knowing when or where this thing would appear. I retreated to my bed and put on as many layers of clothing as I could find when I peeked out again. I was met with the most horrifying sight yet. The monster had climbed onto the hood of my truck and was now slamming its head into the windshield, trying to get inside. I knew the windshield was wide enough, it could get its feet in, and then I was done for. I raised the gun, aimed at its head, and fired. The explosion was immense, instantly deafening me, leaving nothing but ringing in my ears. I reeled back, but the monster continued coming at me. My bullet not only didn't stop the monster, but it also damaged the windshield, making it easier for him to get in. The monster seemed surprised as the bullet bounced off his skull, then continued its assault on the windshield. He kept slamming the glass until it shattered into a million pieces before the ground. I aimed at its face and fired 2 shots, the bullets ricocheting off its skull, causing it to rear back slightly. I fired 2 more into its chest. It didn't drop to the ground screaming in agony as I'd hoped, but I could tell, at the very least, it bothered him. He jumped off the hood and vanished. I stared out into the inky blackness, trying in vain to catch any sign of him. I darted from one side window to the other, and back again, waiting for that ghastly face to reappear. After what seemed like an eternity, I saw feet rising up from the passenger side window. I fired a shot at the face, and he vanished again as I spun around. I saw its head rise up at the driver's side window. I fired a shot, and it vanished again. I jumped up and scrambled over to the other side seat, knowing he would soon appear on the other side. Sure enough, 10 seconds later, he reappeared. I fired another shot. It was playing with me. It vanished. I returned to the passenger seat and waited, aiming at the empty driver's side window. Then, teeth suddenly appeared from behind. I lunged forward to turn around as the teeth sunk into my clothing, ripping into my shoulder. I spun around and jammed the gun under its lower jaw and fired. I heard him shriek in pain as he recoiled. I knew I was inches from death. I reached up and touched the wound on my shoulder, my hand coming away covered in blood. I retreated to my bed, ripped off a section of the sheet, pressed it against the wound, and tore off more to bind it to my shoulder. I stepped back into the cab to see it crouched on the hood, waiting for me. I never thought it would end this way. My truck window shattered, the interior bloody, the frigid wind and snow blowing in on me, to empty eyes staring at me like a predator assessing the animal it was about to kill. It climbed through the remnants of the windshield. I knew I was dead. It slowly advanced in desperation. I lunged forward, shoved the gun into one of its eye sockets, and pulled the trigger. The sound it made was unlike anything I'd ever heard and something I never want to hear again. It was both a deep guttural sound and a high-pitched scream. It sounded like someone had unleashed a demon from the depths of hell. My inner voice screamed at me, "Run!" I fumbled for the driver's side door and finally tumbled out when it opened on a clear day with no snow. I might have suffered a concussion or broken bones from landing on the bare asphalt, but the deep snow was on the ground. The first time in the past 24 hours the snow had helped me. I immediately jumped up and looked around for a place to hide, but there was nowhere. Everything was covered in snow. I glanced back at the trailer and realized the snow had drifted up to the bottom of the trailer. I couldn't even see under it. I quickly dove under and turned around to try and pile snow up, hiding any sign I'd crawled in there. Shining my flashlight around, I lay there, trying to look in every direction at the same time, trying to anticipate where the monster would come from. My breath puffed out in ragged, despairing clouds. Nothing. There was nothing. The monster was gone. I didn't expect my one shot to kill it, but I was sure it enraged it. It was probably tearing apart the interior of my truck. I looked around for a better hiding spot. My eyes settled on the wheels of the truck. It looked like there was just enough space between the tires and the differential. It would be a tight fit, but anything was better than being found by that thing. I turned and slid my feet in first. Ironically, the grease on the differential helped me slide through more easily as I got my shoulders through. It suddenly felt too tight. I was stuck. I couldn't go forward. I couldn't go back. Terror flooded my mind as I thrashed wildly, like I couldn't breathe. After what felt like the longest minute of my life, I finally managed to get my shoulders through and into my hiding spot. The first half hour was the worst. The ringing in my ears was starting to subside, but I couldn't hear anything other than my own breathing. The cold slowly seeped into my clothing. Still no sign of the monster. Another hour passed, and I felt like my bladder was going to burst. Still nothing during the long wait. I pulled the clip from my gun and counted how many bullets I had left. No matter how many times I counted, the result was the same one. I knew one bullet wouldn't save me. There was only one thing I could do with that bullet. If it found me, I would end it myself. I took the bullet out of the clip and stared at it. I polished it with my coat and stared at my reflection in the gleaming metal. The edges of the snowdrifts around the trailer started to glow. I knew the sun was coming up. The darkness would no longer be my friend. I was about to give up and crawl out of my hiding spot when I heard it, a soft sniffing sound. I peeked out, and there it was. Its head emerged from the wall of blood where I had crawled under the trailer. A few drops of blood had fallen from the wound in my shoulder. It was sniffing the blood. Those few drops of blood would lead it straight to me. Sure enough, the monster turned and looked in my direction. I lay still as a stone as it slowly walked toward me. Its large body wouldn't fit under the trailer. I could hear it growling in frustration. It came closer, right towards me. There was no doubt, it knew I was there. I closed my eyes and put the barrel of the gun under my chin, ready to pull the trigger at any moment. I felt its hot breath, smelled the stench of death. Then suddenly, it screamed. I could feel the truck jostle above me. I opened my eyes to a most amazing sight. Its foot was tangled in the chains underneath the trailer. It screamed and thrashed. Struggling to get free, it pulled back hard, and I felt the truck shift a good 4 inches to the side. The differential was now pressing against me. I had to wiggle around to avoid being crushed before it could get completely free. I scrambled out from under the truck. It was no longer a hiding spot. I crawled as fast as I could, hoping it wouldn't realize I had left. I didn't know where to go, but anywhere was better than a useless hiding spot. As I stood next to the truck, I saw a large patch of red on the snow. My shot hadn't been as useless as I thought. I looked up at the ravaged cab of my truck. I stood there helpless. This caught me off guard. I had nowhere to go. It limped up to me, staring at me. Those empty eyes seemed to radiate anger. Then there was a loud rumbling from behind, louder than the roars of the monster. I realized it was the snowplow. Before I could react, it turned almost instantly and vanished into the white snow. I watched as the snowplow pushed piles of snow past my truck, over the edge of the parking lot. "You been here all night?" the driver, Daniel, asked. "Or did you get here just before the blizzard? What happened to your truck?" He looked up at my shattered windows. I followed his gaze and was silent for a moment. "Someone tried to rob me." I lied. The truth sounded too unbelievable. "Looks like you handled yourself all right," he said, eyeing the gun in my hand. I looked down at the pistol, then tucked it into my waistband. "It was a rough night," I said. "Don't worry. The roads are getting cleared. I'll get this area cleared for you two." "Thanks," I said. He nodded, then backed up to continue plowing. I watched where he had just plowed, and next to my truck I saw a long streak of red. I followed it to the edge of the parking lot, gun in hand, and looked down. The drop-off was about 10 feet or more. The snow had started to drift. I followed the red path down with my eyes and saw antlers protruding from the snow. I stared at it for 10 minutes. It didn't move. I was interrupted when the plow pushed another pile of snow that covered the antlers. I watched for another 5 minutes just to be sure. The plowed driver pulled up next to me. "You okay?" he asked. I tore my gaze away from the pile of snow. "Yeah, I'm fine. You sure?" he asked, pointing at my shoulder. "Oh yeah, just got nicked by some glass," I said, remembering the monster's teeth ripping through my shoulder. "Well, I think the store just opened," he said. "Maybe you should get that looked at." "I will, thanks," I said. I climbed into the cab, brushing the glass off the seat, and drove to the gas station. After filling up, I began the long journey home. The entire trip was frigid, no windows or windshield. with me wearing all my cold weather gear and a face mask the heater turned up full blast and pointed at my feet, kept my lower body warm. At least, I didn't call a tow truck. I wanted to get out of there. I never went back to that truck stop. I wasn't going to risk finding out if that thing was still alive. I've never mentioned the horrific encounter to anyone else. I wish I could erase it from my memory. As I drove through endless stretches of trees, heading home, I saw a creature peeking at me from between the trees. I used to think they were hallucinations. Now I know they're real.